The United States Supreme Court has delivered a major decision that could reshape presidential power, global trade policy, and the future of emergency economic authority in America, as the court ruled against former President Donald Trump's use of emergency tariffs, creating a moment that legal experts are calling one of the most important constitutional checks on executive authority in recent years. The case centers on tariffs imposed during Donald Trump's presidency, when his administration argued that America's growing trade imbalance and dependence on foreign imports represented a national economic emergency. Using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, commonly known as IE, Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on imported goods from several countries, including major trading partners, claiming that the president had the authority to act quickly without waiting for Congress. These tariffs affected billions of dollars in global trade and sparked reactions across financial markets, manufacturing industries, and international governments. Businesses and trade groups soon challenged the decision in court, arguing that tariffs are fundamentally a taxation power that belongs to Congress, not the president, and that using emergency powers in this way stretched the law far beyond its original purpose. The dispute slowly moved through lower courts before reaching the U.S. Supreme Court, where justices were asked to answer a critical constitutional question: can a president use emergency economic laws to impose broad tariffs without congressional approval? In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that the president does not have unlimited authority under IEEPA to impose tariffs, and that the law was designed mainly for sanctions and financial restrictions during genuine national emergencies, not for restructuring long-term trade policy. The majority opinion emphasized that the U.S. Constitution gives Congress primary authority over trade and taxation, and allowing a president to bypass lawmakers would disrupt the balance of power carefully designed by the founders. According to the court, economic concerns alone cannot automatically justify emergency powers unless Congress clearly authorizes such actions. Legal analysts say the ruling sends a strong message that emergency powers cannot be expanded, simply because a president believes the situation is urgent or politically necessary. Supporters of the decision argue that it protects democratic oversight and prevents future presidents from using emergency declarations to control economic policy without debate or approval. Critics, however, claim the ruling could limit a president's ability to respond quickly to economic threat, especially in a fast-changing global economy where trade conflicts can escalate rapidly. The decision immediately triggered reactions across financial markets, with investors interpreting the ruling as a sign of greater stability and predictability in U.S. trade policy. Many importers and manufacturers welcomed the decision, because tariffs had increased costs for companies relying on foreign materials, while exporters hoped the ruling would ease tensions with international partners affected by the trade measures. Economists noted that tariffs often act as hidden taxes on consumers, raising prices for everyday goods, meaning the court's decision could indirectly influence inflation and consumer spending. Meanwhile, Donald Trump responded quickly, criticizing the ruling and arguing that the president must have strong economic tools to protect American industries and workers. He suggested that alternative legal pathways could allow similar tariffs under different trade laws, including provisions within the Trade Act of 1974 that grant temporary tariff authority under certain conditions. This response signaled that the political debate over tariffs is far from over, and may continue regardless of the court's decision. Political analysts say the ruling could also shape future presidential campaigns, as trade policy remains a central issue in American politics, especially in regions dependent on manufacturing jobs. Beyond politics, the case has broader global implications because U.S. tariffs influence supply chains, international pricing, and diplomatic relationships worldwide. Countries affected by earlier tariffs closely watched the ruling, seeing it as a possible shift toward more predictable trade negotiations rather than sudden executive actions. International trade experts believe the decision reinforces the importance of rules-based economic systems, which many global partners prefer over unilateral decisions. Another key aspect of the ruling is its long-term constitutional impact, as it establishes a precedent limiting how future presidents interpret emergency powers. Legal scholars explain that the Supreme Court rarely intervenes directly in economic policy disputes, making this case especially significant because it clarifies boundaries between executive authority and legislative responsibility. The dissenting justices argued that presidents must retain flexibility to respond to economic dangers quickly, and that courts should avoid restricting executive tools during uncertain times. However, the majority rejected that view, stating that flexibility cannot replace constitutional structure. For ordinary Americans, the case may seem distant, but its effects could influence job markets, product prices, and international economic stability. Tariffs often shape which industries grow, which companies struggle, and how global competition evolves. By limiting emergency tariff powers, the court may encourage future administrations to work more closely with Congress before making large trade decisions, potentially slowing policy changes but increasing transparency. Businesses now face a new legal environment where sudden tariff announcements may become less likely, providing more certainty for long-term planning and investment. At the same time, political debates about globalization, domestic manufacturing, and economic nationalism are expected to intensify. As leaders search for new strategies that remain within constitutional limits, analysts also point out that this ruling reflects a broader trend in which courts are increasingly asked to define the scope of presidential authority in areas ranging from immigration to environmental regulation and now international trade. The Supreme Court's decision ultimately highlights a central principle of American governance. No single branch of government holds unlimited power, even during times described as emergencies. As the global economy becomes more interconnected and economic conflicts grow more complex, the balance between fast executive action and democratic oversight will remain a defining challenge for future leaders. Whether one views the ruling as a victory for constitutional order or a limitation on presidential strength, it clearly marks a turning point in how emergency powers can be used in economic policy. The story is not just about tariffs or one political figure, but about the ongoing struggle to define authority, accountability, and the rule of law in modern governance. As reactions continue to unfold across Washington, financial markets, and international capitals, one thing is certain: the Supreme Court's decision has reshaped the conversation around presidential power and trade policy, ensuring that future economic battles will be fought not only in political arenas but also within the constitutional boundaries reaffirmed by the nation's highest court.